Well, hello. And if you're ready for this, we are jumping in to part 8 of becoming a Gibborim. Because if you didn't know it, you were born for such a time as this. The days are sincerely evil out there, right? People are more aware of that now maybe than ever before in the history of the last few years, few generations maybe. But everybody, always, from the beginning of time immemorial, has been born into trying days. Some far more than others. And some of you, many of you probably who are watching this right now, were probably born into a much more comfortable set of days than a lot of people since all the way back to the beginning. Because trials and tribulations and just outright, outrageously deceptive and insidiously dark and filthy people exist out there. I don't think I need to go into greater detail than what I did in my book, Snatched from the Flames. If you want to check that out, feel free. Literally, it's free, every bit of it. Audio, printed, digital. Every form of it you could possibly need to consume it is there for you. So feel free to look into that if you want to see some radical evil side of the world, a little bit more than maybe you had ever prior to this conversation. If not, today we're going to be talking about radical intelligent evil in the scriptures, for certainly, and in real life, because it's walking among us and it's insidious in nature. And because of that, we need to actually think about whether or not people are ever going to be raised up as a standard against it. Do you actually believe that you, yourself, individual said, looking in the mirror at times when you see yourself, that person, that man, that woman, that child, when you really look yourself in the mirror, do you ever see yourself as the standard that is raised up against insidious, radical, intelligent evil? I think a lot of people wake up with maybe an idea of that, but most of them don't actually look in the mirror and say, yes, I am the standard that has been raised up against evil in my life and the life of the people around me. Do people look at you as someone they can count on to be dependable in days of calamity? Calamity is like an old English word, which means absolute nightmaric conditions on a scale that humans have struggled to articulate. Like, level horrible, like utter destruction of every facet of the way you used to think your life was structured. Just the end of the world, maybe as you knew it. Teotwaki is how people acronymize that and then say it in a way that makes people sound snazzy. Teotwaki, the end of the world as you know it, because it's really the end of the world as most people have known it out there. For all intents and purposes, I talk to people who basically live in prison now voluntarily. Most of them, a lot of them, all over the world, as a matter of fact. And it's nothing like I had expected it was going to be. Is this what you thought it would be like in April of 2020? That people would be voluntarily submitting themselves to a system of control that entices them, coerces, threatens, intimidates, gestates inside them so much fear that they cannot even voluntarily find the will to leave their front door. That's a totally different kind of the end of the world as we knew it than I'd pictured in my head. I think I'd probably seen a little too many of those survival movies. Anybody else out there that just had a sincere love of the apocalyptic films since they were born? Yeah. I'll like self-five myself to that. I loved those shows. I loved those movies like tremendously. The Last Ship, The Colony, all these like kind of entertaining facets of just apocalypse kind of scenarios, right? I used to be fascinated by it, loved it. My wife and I would sit around and we would binge watch those shows like they were going out of style because it was scratching this internal itch that I've had since I was born, which when I first read The Sword of Awesomeness, it blew my mind. Not a little bit, just outside from one ear to the other. Do you ever see that picture of a bullet going through an apple that was just pictured perfect? The rifle bullet goes shooting through the apple, and the apple has this beautiful little cavitation that's happening on the front end, and a hole is going in this way, and then it's just erupting in a perfect conical shape out the back, and it's just that's how I felt like the first time I actually read the Bible. Not a little bit, like read it like it was real, like history, because I first read the Bible as a child, very young, on a regular basis. I read through the whole scriptures by the time I was in 7th grade, and I had sharpened my sword in such an extent because I read those words like they were true, like they were history, like they were something that mattered more than anything else I'd ever experienced in my life. I found life in those words. I found joy and hope and horror and nightmares and the worst kind of evil and conspiracies and violence and bloodshed and deliverance and joy. And I saw stories in there that I'd never heard uttered so wonderfully, so eloquently, so powerfully, and it was genuinely alive. I knew that book was alive, and it was the one pure source of life I had going into me at a time when this dragon here over my shoulder used to rule and reign in my life and the life of my family members on an ever-present basis. It was continually stalking me in the darkness, and I grew up in a world where it was fear and intimidation and control. And then it was a wall between that and the normal world. And it shaped me in such a way that when I read these stories, when I read like we're reading about here in David, where David is on the run and he's going into the wilderness and all of these people begin to gather to him, all of these who are distraught, who are in debt and discontented with their life, they came to him. And he was in a cave of Adullam. And he went to this strongholds and he begins to walk out this life in the wilderness where at the same time that he's out there doing that, his very king who he served and offered himself to is plotting ways to kill him all the time. Like every single time we look at what Saul's doing in his life and in the lives of anybody he's influencing, he's just plotting destruction. He is the author of destruction and death. King Saul in this story is about to turn so nightmarically evil. It's appalling. It's overwhelming. It fills your heart with sickness to even hear it. If it doesn't for you, that's probably because you've so desensitized yourself to actual real life suffering. You've just vicariously lived through entertainment. I got desensitized to trauma and violence and destruction and death and despair by how much time I spent watching the entertainment, by being entertained by death, by being entertained by calamity. I remember distinctly back in 2012 wanting the world to end so badly so I could just go live in the mountains and be a squatter in the forest somewhere. Then I would live. Then I would be a mighty man. Then I would finally be a warrior because I would be loose from these shackles of what the constraints had been in corporatized American dreamland. I was trapped in that rat race for so long, and not even so long. Okay, I just have a very short attention span to terrible things, right? Like ongoing perpetual suffering. I have a threshold that just get stuck somewhere about like 3 years in. I really can't take another minute of this, maybe a year and a half. And I start seeing how much this system that was offered to me, like just get a good job, like go to a good school, come down with a nice 4-year pedigreed stamped approval from some yay men out there that say you're approved to go out forth into the world, to work at a job where you're just got some taskmaster over you like the Egyptians were to the Israelites who just... You're never going to make it to the top, right? You know that pyramid you're trying to climb in the American dream? Yeah, it's uncapped. And the only thing at the top of it is just another guy waiting to steal, kill, and destroy your dream so he can have his. I didn't see it play out any other way. The fruit of that was born out that way for me. Everybody has their own path of life that the Father can lead them on. For me, I just got so sick of it, I had to vomit it out of my system. So I thought, let's escape to the wilderness. And my wife and I began backpacking, and that was my first sense of, this could be it. This could be the way that I could live at peace, where no man was my master, but the Father and his creation, and I just lived. We got to go where we wanted to go, do what we wanted to do. We had the unction to follow after him. At the same time, I was pretty much just wanting the world to end out there so I could be freed from my discontentment, my debts, and really my despair. Because I was miserable. And I think so many people have been miserable for so long that they've become desensitized to it because they've they've scratched their itches just enough with the entertainment to any capacity of something you want to watch. Think about it. Never before in the world's history could you consume unlimited, individualized, personalized entertainment of your choice for almost free. You can basically get it for free. Limitless content for free. Okay? There's some technological requirements predicated on that. If you have any type of Black Mirror to watch this with, you have one in your pocket. You can be entertained endlessly, no matter what you're into. You're like, you know what I love? The tires on vehicles. I want to watch shows all about tires. You can do that basically for the next 16 years of your life, without question, on demand, forever, right? That was not always available. You can buy for the price of a book, right? For the price of a book, you can have unlimited entertainment funneled into your home or your TV on the regs. But you can't go buy 4 organic heirloom tomatoes for the same price. Let's think about if that's not by design, sincerely by design. How much time, energy, resources went into creating all that entertainment? It doesn't just come out of the airspace, right? There's humans behind that. They're real people. There's entire studios and industries that are taking advantage of that and feeding that festering wound and scratching that itch perpetually that's assailing us. But because of that, people are now comfortable to voluntarily submit into a system of where you just stay inside now, okay? Okay, as long as you're willing to watch something to just not go crazy. Because how else do you stay inside in a prison? I don't know. Ask prisoners. Do you know any? Have you ever talked to a prisoner once in your life? Have you ever actually met somebody who was locked up against their will? It's called institutionalizing them. You make them comfortable, not necessarily comfortable, right? There's a scalability to comfort that the human can condition themselves to. You can become comfortable in most situations, in most environments, regardless of anything you are going through at the time. Human beings are resilient beyond people's real measure of understanding. People are so resilient out there. They will go through ongoing perpetual suffering that to somebody who is in a different level of comfortability is impossible. As in, I couldn't ever possibly even imagine somebody going through that much suffering. And yet, even in that level of suffering, those people probably actually have more joy and contentment and satisfaction than most people who live in the comfortability world have ever known was possible. Do you see? There's a trade-off that happens if you're willing to endure suffering, if you're willing to go through persecution, if you're willing to be belittled and stripped down from what the world would say you need to be happy, if you let that be scourged off of you by the destructive power of the systems of men or by the hand of the living God, it will refine you. It will change you. It will make you into a mightier person than you were previously. Those 8 years ago when I was fixated on watching all these shows about going out and being in a land where it's just me and my horse and my dog, and we're riding into the wind as a survivor on the trail, that lone wolf survivor kind of stuff, or you're in a community or a clan and all those different scenarios that got painted for us. I just think we should read the Bible, remember, sword of awesomeness, and find out how the heck people survived their horrible nightmares and the worst days of their life. So we're going to jump in, folks. Remember, drinking vessels. Have them on your person and about your body with due haste. Okay. If you didn't know it, we are reading through 1 Samuel right now because we're doing a study on the mighty men, the mighty women, the mighty children, and the heroes of old, not the Nephilim, say, okay? You can go watch Marvel comic books anytime you want. They'll have lots of lights and flashing strobe effects that make you think, wow. They'll have all kinds of fallen angel references and demonic black magic sorcery that's ensconced in it too. But, you know, it's more entertaining than you not knowing what this book says because it takes discipline to read it. So I encourage you, it would behoove you to discipline your face meat while you still have it. Yeah, you still have those eyes. Put them to work. on something other than the Hollywood ones, shall we? Now, we are in 1 Samuel 22, and I've got to just go back to the first verses because it's the best 2 verses in the history of my life. These were the verses that gave me hope for going off into the wilderness someday and knowing what it'd be like, because this is where people genuinely show what's in them. They reveal finally what's in their heart when they go into the wilderness. And I think I've always just waited for the testing of all mankind too. I just kind of always wanted to see what everybody would be like if they were stripped of everything. That I've always kind of wanted to see what that'd be like. So let's see what happens, shall we? Let's go. 1 Samuel 22. So David departed from there and escaped to the cave of Adullam. And then his brothers and all his father's household heard of it. They went down there to him, everyone who was in distress, and everyone who was in debt, and everyone who was discontented gathered to him. And David became their captain over them. Now there are about 400 men with him. And that's also very likely families, okay? Later on, we definitely know their wives and their children are with them. So running out to the wilderness, if you have a family and wife and children and said things, you generally don't leave them behind. They'll be there. They're supposed to be there with you. If you've been entrusted to them, they should be together, unless you're given very specific and clear instructions otherwise. We see the families also taken care of here, okay? We're going to see them go through some hardships. They're going to get captured at times. There's going to be mighty, insane, horrific battles that are going to take place right around them at times. And people will be hunting them. And it's also families and children. It's not just dudes out in the wilderness like, yes, the infantry platoon and the division, right? Or the unit. To all of you other ones out there who know what I'm talking about. Yes, they're actual wives and families that don't look like that version of it that Hollywood sold us. Because if you read the Bible, it's way better. Check it out. It'll teach you righteous living instead of just deplorable living in adultery and violence and death. Why do they always portray every action movie as sex, death, violence, and generally chronic amounts of horrific toxins and substances being used all the time? Anyways, basically every version of Hoorah, Mighty Men is full of those 3 things. It's a 3-corded strand that's just really not easily broken. That's why. But anyways, and David went from there to Mizpah of Moab, and he said to the king of Moab, please let my father and my mother come and stay with you until I know what Yahweh will do for me. Then he left them with the king of Moab, and they stayed with him all that time David was in the stronghold. And the prophet Gad said to David, do not stay in the stronghold. Depart and go into the land of Judah. So David departed and went into the forest of Hereth. Then Saul heard that David and the men who were with him had been discovered. Now Saul was sitting in Gibeah under the tamarisk tree on the height with his spear in his hand. Remember, Saul's always got his spear in his hand? Literally every time we see this. Anyways, don't you want to just have a spear in your hand? Not so much after you see what he does with it, okay? I should read on. Okay, and all his servants were standing around him. Saul said to his servants, who stood around him, hear now, O Benjamites. Will the son of Jesse also give to all of you fields and vineyards? Will he make you all commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds? For all of you have conspired against me, so that there is no one who discloses to me when my son makes a covenant with the son of Jesse. And there is none of you who is sorry for me or discloses to me that my son has stirred up my servant against me to lie in ambush, as it is this day. Then Doeg the Edomite, who was standing by the servants of Saul, said, I saw the son of Jesse coming to Nob, to Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub. He inquired of Yahweh for him, gave him provisions, and gave him the sword of Goliath the Philistine. Then the king sent someone to summon Ahimelech the priest, the son of Ahitub, and his father's household, the priests who were in Nob, and all of them came to the king. Okay, if you didn't know it, conspiracy alert, we're going to talk conspiracies now because they're biblical. And if you don't like conspiracy talk, well, get a chapstick because it's good for your lips. And it'll keep you ready to go every day of your life. Anyways, if you didn't know there was a conspiracy about, guess what? There's always a conspiracy about, especially most ever presently in regards to the wicked and the righteous. Yeah, there's some camps out there, folks. Two kingdoms. Kingdom of Yahweh, kingdom of the darkness, the dragon. Yep, we are the kingdom of man, right in the middle earth. There's a war all the time. It never stops. It will never stop until, really, this one with the pierced hand, yeah, he's going to come and set everything to reckoning. And it's going to be a holy and complete and absolute total reckoning. Nothing will stand before him or against it ever again after that. There will come a time when we beat our swords into plowshares. Until that time, we carry swords. And this is the sharpest one ever made in the history of ever. Check into it. Here's a conspiracy for you. The dragon wants to eat and devour and consume every man, woman, child, and future of everything that has ever been good on the earth. Devour it. Literally devour it. And here we're going to read about a devouring of every man, woman, child, cattle, sheep, and ox in existence of a city, of not the bad guys. This is all the righteous ones are about to die. Minus one. There will be only one survivor from the entirety of a family, city, town, community, priesthood left at the end of this. That's really overwhelming to get your head around because they should be protected, right? You would think that the priests of the Lord are going to be protected in this story. Oh, I'm jumping ahead a little bit. I'm sorry, but there's a serious conspiracy about to go down. I should just read it. All right, I'm just going to read it, and then I'm going to go back and really walk you all through the conspiracy. Because this is the worst case scenario that most people say, that's not going to happen to me. No, I definitely am not going to have to go through this, right? This isn't like in our ever-present potential future immediately kind of lifestyle, is it? Could this be our time where people are going to go through the absolute unleashing of destruction and violence and the slaughtering of every man, woman, and child? Let's read what it's like for people in the scriptures, shall we? Let's go back in. Okay. Saul said to the king, Saul said, "Listen now, son of Ahitub." And he answered, "Here I am, my lord." Saul then said to him, "Why have you, the son of Jesse, conspired against me, in that you have given him bread and a sword, and have inquired of Yahweh for him, so that he would rise up against me by lying in ambush, as it is this day?" Then Ahimelech answered the king and said, "And whom among all your servants is as faithful as David, even the king's son-in-law, who is captain over your guard and is honored in your house? Did I just begin to inquire of Yahweh for him today? Far be it from me. Do not let the king impute anything to his servant or to any of the household of my father, for your servant knows nothing at all of this whole affair." But the king said, "You shall surely die, Ahimelech, you and all your father's household." And the king said to the guards who were attending him, "Turn around and put the priests of the Lord to death, because their hand also is with David, and because they knew that he was fleeing and did not reveal it to me." But the servants of the king were not willing to put forth their hands to attack the priests of Yahweh. Then the king said to Doeg, you turn around and attack the priests. And Doeg, the Edomite, turned around and attacked the priests, and he killed that day 85 men who wore the linen ephod. And he struck Nob, the city of the priests, with the edge of the sword. Both men and women, children and infants, also oxen, donkeys, and sheep, he struck with the edge of the sword. But one son of Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub, named Abiathar, escaped and fled after David. And Abiathar told David that Saul had killed the priests of the Lord. Oh. Then David said to Abiathar, I knew on that day when Doeg the Edomite was there that he would surely tell Saul, I have brought about the death of every person in your father's household. Stay with me. Do not be afraid, for he who seeks my life seeks your life, for you are safe with me. Crazy, intense story. This is why, if you have not actually read the Bible as a history book and thought about being a human in that situation, you've never really read the scriptures. And there's so much in here that would help you to understand and be able to dismantle things that are happening in the world around you. It would give you these lenses with which to see the world that aren't the same movie magic film that's been over your eyes for so long. I grew up on the Left Behind series, of don't worry, you get raptured, you're all clear. And then everything after that was exactly the time I wanted to live in. I never once wanted to be in the first wave of that session. I always wanted to be in the end days. I hoped and prayed my whole life to be in the thick of it, right up in the middle of it, contending with the what comes out of the abyss, right? I wanted to be there to stand as a guard against that. I wanted my whole life to be the last man standing, to be the defender, the final guardian at the very end of it all, to be the last one advancing the kingdom with every bit of blood and breath in my body until the final moment he brings me out and sets me free from the shackles of this suffering of this life and gives me a hope and a courage that is absolutely unshakable, unstoppable immortality that's promised us to those who believe on him. I've been waiting for that my whole life. And so I used to just look around at the worldly kind of things to try to figure out what that looked like. But I think you just read right there. This is exactly a case study for the end days. This is a genuine mirror image of what is happening in the end of the days. We're going to parallel over from this to Hebrews and to Revelation because it's unstoppable, the connections of what's going down here. You're going to see, like I talked about before, Doeg the Edomite, he is literally a shepherd. Remember, Doeg the Edomite is over all of Saul's shepherds. He's the man above all of them. But David, remember him? Child shepherd boy, servant of the Lord, shepherd of the Lord. Those two guys on the same day, exact same day, go and inquire at the priest of the Lord at Nob, okay? Ahimelech. Yes, Ahimelech. On the same day, both men, right, seemingly doing the righteous thing, one has in his heart to do and obey the commands and the instructions of Yahweh because, remember, David, wrote 2/3 of it. He wrote a huge portion of our scriptures for a reason. But a lot of what came out of that was in the wilderness where he's about to go. Doeg the Edomite, he's on the fast-track corporate plan. Woohoo! How do you get promoted in your corporate job? Does it not take generally somebody else dying or just being fired, right? How else do you climb that ladder? But you're kind of always needing a position up, right? Doeg the Edomite's on that track. David's on the, I'm fleeing for my life. I'm almost naked running so hard. I'm trying to get away from the guys trying to kill me kind of plan, right? David's leaving everything he's ever had that was once the favor of the king, the son-in-law. Like, I'm living in the palace on the regulars. I get to hang out and just sing flute songs and lyres and lyres and harps. He was crushing life. He was, slaying thousands and tens of thousands. David was just apex predator, man. And now he's on the run. And so the king shepherd man, Doeg the Edomite, also there at the Lord's house the same day. David inquires of the Lord. He gets provision, the literal bread of the Lord. Remember Bread and Bullets episode? Check that out. Then David flees with the sword and bread and the word of the Lord. Powerful thing. He's ready to go. Doeg the Edomite, he flees with a morsel. Okay? He flees with information that he then uses exactly like a good serpent does. Because Doeg the Edomite is a child of the devil. Most sincerely, he is without question the embodiment of the beast on the earth when it comes to the worst kind of things you could ever do with the power and the authority and the opportunity to use your life for good or for evil. He chooses left-hand path. Let's just go down the bloodshed violence and do whatever it takes to get to the top policy plan. That's why I talk about a lot the United States military and my experience in it, because I saw in a culture of death a whole lot of that, go figure. I didn't expect it as much because they advertise themselves as good, trustworthy heroes. The problem is, in order to advance in a kingdom of violence and death, it generally comes through conspiracies, blackmail, and sedition. That's a really saucy word. That means usurping from, like, pulling some guy's ankle down just at that opportune moment when he was reaching his hand up and maybe only had 2 points of contact on the wall, and he falls to his death, and instead you climb to the top of the tower first, and then you get appointed general. Right? That's the system that cultivates the champions like Goliath of Gath. Yahweh's system is the system of servitude, like sincere, authentic, voluntary servitude. He who wants to be the greatest in the kingdom of Yahweh must actually be the least. Like, if you want to be the leader, go serve everybody. Go start washing all your neighbors' feet. Have you ever been in a relationship with anyone where you could offer to them, can I serve you and wash your feet? Watch that. Go sincerely try to wash someone's feet today. Maybe your wife's, maybe your best friend's, maybe your like worst nightmare frustrating neighbor. You should love them so much that you get to a place where you wash their feet. It's one of the most serving things you can ever do to another human being. It's also so humbling to have your feet washed. It changes you. See, there's a powerful thing that they don't do in corporate boardrooms. I never saw any of my managers wash each other's feet. Did you ever see that in that system? Even at your church, I have a real question for you. I know I tend to do some strategic, sharp sword edge wielding against people that come from the house of the Lord. Modern corporate Christianity. I do that because it looked just like the boardrooms in the businesses I also worked at. That's why, is because I see how franchise models. If you haven't ever studied businesses, small businesses, I spent a good long while studying under some of the best business leaders in the world, and I learned the art of business pretty well. And then I saw and turned around and went, wow, this explains everything I ever saw in the church. Whoa! Go figure. And then you come to find out that back in the 80s and 90s, the church leaders and of all kinds of denominations discovered business tactics to employ against the church to grow their church. So they took business growth models and applied it to church systems and stuff like this and built a business church. I don't mean everything they do is bad, that there's not powerful works of God that happen still within that system. I'm not trying to mitigate from that. I'm trying to address the leadership mottos and ethics and the directions that they choose to participate in. Voluntarily now, that doesn't happen anymore. So that's an interesting time. Nobody goes to those churches anymore. And so it's showing what's their fruit. But those guys went to the house of the Lord. They sought things from the house of the Lord. David got all the provision he needed to go into the wilderness to ultimately one day become king. Doeg the Edomite is going for the fast track plan. So he's going to get it. Saul is like, let's conspire a bit, shall we? Saul, He is the accuser of the brethren right now, without question. He is the worst possible king you could have around you. He accuses everyone who's around him of lying, conspiring, basically, he accuses them of everything that they're doing for the woes in his life, like that they didn't tell him that Jesse, his own son, had made a covenant with David. All of these things. Saul is accusing all these guys of doing this stuff. That's a bad way of leading your people, first of all. It's a really not nice idea, because what it's going to breed to the surface is exactly what you're going to see here. I don't see David accusing his brothers and his mighty men ever in the wilderness of conspiring to kill him or to conspire to allow other people to kill him. David, no. I see David, when we read what he talks about in the wilderness, like the gut-wrenching agony of the Psalms, up and, oh my gosh, down into the bottom crevices of the valley of the shadow of death down. David's all over the boards. If David reads, the Psalms read like an unbelievable nightmare and the most exciting thing you've ever seen in your life. I'm pretty sure David is a fractured, shattered individual in some serious ways here. He's been through some stuff, folks. Think about it. Here's about the worst tragedy that happens, in my opinion, because directly we know David did something. Doeg the Edomite hears Saul accusing everyone of this conspiracies and says, "This is my chance. I know something that I could tell him that would give me the favor of the king and give me a promotion." Doeg the Edomite, folks, has walked into the room and established himself. He feeds him that seditious little chunk of blackmail morsel that he's tucked away in his sheepfolding garments, and he feeds it right out to the king. The king is like, delicious. Let's go ahead and bring all those people here. So they bring the priests there. They end up saying that Ahimelech, who was innocent, remember, David didn't tell Ahimelech that he was running from the king. Ahimelech did not know what happened. Ahimelech tells the king that. King don't care. King orders the execution. None of the righteous guards of Saul will touch the priests of the Lord. It's not a good idea, folks. There's some certain kinds of people you really shouldn't execute. Chief among them, all of humanity. Don't do it. Not probably your place. Way up there on the scale, though, is everyone who dies in this story. Infants, babies, children, wives, sons, every version of the priests of the Lord and their entire lineage. When you blotting out a bloodline like genocide, or, I forgot the word. There's a specific word for blotting out an individual's bloodline. I can't think of it right now. Needless to say, it's a very strategic move. You're trying to eradicate the potential seed bearers even of that line from ever sprouting up again. He puts them to the edge of the sword the same way he should have put, Amalek's people to the edge of the sword, but he didn't. Remember, this is why Saul's kingdom was torn from him in the beginning, was because he didn't follow a righteous edict to put Amalek and that entire community under the ban, under harem, the utter destruction. And if you don't know why that happened, you got to read further back in the story of the Exodus story, when the people were trying to flee in the wilderness and those same children refused to provide them supplies and needs, or just let them walk through their land. Just let them walk through. They did just let us walk through their land, and they didn't. Anyways, they instead attacked. It was bad. Not a good place to be. You got to read the book from the beginning all the way to the end, because then all these stories suddenly have meaning, deep meaning, and you have understanding. But this is why Saul lost his kingship from the beginning, because he disobeyed him there, and he saved the good stuff. He's like, let me just save the tasty bits and morsels. Samuel the priest told him, don't do that. Terrible idea. The kingdom's going to be torn from you and given to David. So this is why Saul also has this predicated ferocity and hatred towards the priests of the Lord, because these priests keep showing up in Saul's life and rendering against him the judgment that's due to him. So he puts every single one of them under the ban. He kills all of them. These were the priests of God. These should have been protected, right? These should have been the people that were spared the judgment. But they're not. I was talking to Chelsea this morning about this, and that shook her, because it's kind of that feeling of like, there's a lot of good people that do die, right? When you read in Revelation, the next time there's a mass destruction of this, If you haven't read Revelation recently, you get a blessing for reading it. How many books did you read this day or in your life that promised you an eternal blessing? Just for reading them, okay? There's some good ones out there. I understand. They're going to give you blessings, but not like this one. But it says here, we're talking about said dragon talk here. This is where it all does come from, right? You know that. This devil is the dragon, the serpent of old. That's Revelation just 10. Let me just say that. Or no, Revelation 12:9. It says, and the great dragon was thrown down, the serpent of old, who is called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. This is the most powerful verse, though, I believe, in the entirety of Scripture for most of us to be paying attention to. I may have put it somewhere in my book, hidden as part of a code for you cipher hunters. And they overcame him because of the blood of the Lamb and because of the word of their testimony, and they did not love their life even when faced with death. For this reason, rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to the earth and the sea, because the dragon has come down to you, having great wrath, knowing that he has only a short time. And when the dragon saw that he was thrown down to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gives birth to the male child. But the two wings of the great eagle were given to the woman, so that she could fly into the wilderness, to her place, where she was nourished for a time, a times, and half a time, from the presence of the dragon. And the serpent poured water like a river out of his mouth after the woman, so that he might cause her to be swept away with the flood. But the earth helped the woman. That's why maybe you should just pray and ask the earth to open its mouth sometimes, and then make for you a cave, like the cave of Adullam, where the mighty men hid and all their families. And the cave, earth opened its mouth and drank up the river, which the dragon poured out of its mouth. So the dragon was enraged with the woman and went off to make war with the rest of her children, who keep the commandments of Yahweh and hold to the testimony of Jesus. This is a serious moment in the history of the world. And it later says to us, by the way, this isn't just like the only cities of refuge that are going to be protected. The beast and the dragon and the outrageous, horrific system that he deploys against them is so powerful. It does have authority over us to kill and destroy. Listen, if you didn't know that, it's intense, and you've got to understand that. Some of us are appointed to die, actually to die, to the sword. Some of us are appointed to captivity. Some of us are appointed to destruction. It says, and these are the good guys. Remember, this is not the bad guys. This is good people, the righteous ones, who shouldn't have to die, but they're going to. And he says, and if anyone is destined for captivity, to captivity he goes. If anyone kills with the sword he must be killed. Here is the perseverance of the faith and the saints. Then I saw another beast. Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had two horns like a lamb, but he spoke as a dragon. And he exercises all authority of the first beast in his presence, and he makes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast whose fatal wound was healed. He performs great signs, so that he even makes fire come down out of heaven to the earth in the presence of men. And he deceives those who dwell on the earth because of the signs which was given to him to perform in the presence of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image of the beast who had the wound of the sword and has come to life. And it was given to him to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast would even speak, and cause as many as do not worship the image of the beast to be killed. And he causes all, the small and the great, the rich and the poor, and the free men and the slaves, to be given a mark on their right hand and on their forehead. and he provides that no one will be able to buy or to sell except the one who has the mark, either the name or the beast or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for the number of the beast of that man, and his number is 666. Man. This is a brutal story. He overcomes every tribe, every people. If you read this, he literally said it's everybody. Everybody begins to follow after him. It is given to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And authority over every tribe and people and tongue and nation was given to him. It is going to be given over to people at times. There's times where I read about in the insanity of God, and I read about the persecuted church from the history of time to now, when we read about the believers, that there are times when everybody's going to die. Like everybody minus one here in the story. One man survives. There is one last standing survivor, and he is Abiathar. Oh. He's Abiathar, the son of Ahimelech, who escaped and fled to David. One man standing. There's one man standing at the end of that. He is the only one left. If you don't know what it's like to be a survivor, I can never start to articulate what that is, apart from what I did here. There are people that are survivors who have seen so much, who their eyes bore witness. Their ears bore witness. Their bodies carry witness, the marks of their body. It is borne on their flesh, the testimony of what they endured. They're all around us. You don't have to be the last standing survivor of a genocide to be the last standing survivor. You may be the one member of your family now who didn't follow after the insanity of your family's generational wickedness. You just may be someone who chose to abstain from following deceiving, lying signs and wonders and choosing to follow the living God. You may be the only one surviving now, and you are barely holding on because you carry with you some kind of thing called survivor's guilt. When you're the one who makes it and nobody else does, after a while that eats at you. It eats at you so deeply because the enemy loves to devour you, making you think somehow it would have been better to have died with them. Sometimes it would seem to be easier to have died with them than to bear the emotional turmoil, anguish, and ongoing suffering of being the rememberer, the one who can actually hold those memories and still testify to them. It is a burden that will crush you unless you have someone who is merciful to you and shares your load. David is that. David is that. And you know what David does? The right thing here as a leader. David owns up to his responsibilities. This is why David is the greatest in all of the camp, because David is a servant. And David lays down his life when he did something that caused destruction to come to other people. He sacrifices his pride here and admits something. David said to Abiathar, I knew on that day when Doeg the Edomite was there that he would surely tell Saul, and I have brought about the death of every person in your father's household. Stay with me. Do not be afraid, for he who seeks my life seeks your life, for you are safe with me. David owns that responsibility, but then David covers him. David recognizes that sometimes some of us may be entrusted with the remnant. We just may get the leftovers. We may just end up being entrusted with the one sole survivor of an entire family, and we need to cover them, have mercy on them, provide for them. David says, literally, the threshold covenant, like I talked about in witness protection, go check that out. He offers him the threshold covenant of him who is the anointed to be king, by the way. He says, you are now under the covering of me. He welcomes him in. If you are the last survivor, if you are the only survivor and you've never known the peace of the good shepherd who covers you like that, who takes you in and shares that burden with you so that you don't have to just be the man fleeing anymore, because sometimes you flee for so long and so much has caused you to be in turmoil and anguish and despair and exhaustion, and you need a refuge to deal with all that. David offers him that. David gives him provision now. Abiathar will become the priest of the Lord for David. He brought with him the armor, like I talked about earlier. He's actually got the armor of Yahweh with him, the ephod, the communication tool, the means by which David will inquire of Yahweh from here on out. If all those people hadn't been slain at Nob, David would have never got the ephod. Abiathar should not have been the high priest yet, unless all these people died, and it was not Abiathar's usurping. Do you see? Abiathar got the promotion. David will get the promotion, but David doesn't have to kill the king to get it. David doesn't have to bear the sword and cut off the head of his master in order to be crowned and given the throne. David has to follow the word of the Lord, and he will bring about the prophecies, the confirmed word that he has given him. He will bring that about, and he trusts him to do that. If he does not, he now has every reason to even more so do that. The Lord literally just entrusted him everything he needed to be out there in the wilderness. This will give David the strategic insight he needs to go forward and live throughout the rest of his days, to stay one step outside of the enemy's camp sometimes. This will bring it so close at times where Saul himself will be in the same cave as David and his men are hiding in. And yet David will be hidden from his sight because David has the authority of the Lord. They don't. And it's a serious differentiator here. If all those people hadn't been killed, none of David's abilities would have been enhanced for him to be able to go forth and know when to fight, when to run, when to stay, when to sleep, when to eat, when to literally run for his life. David has the Holy Spirit discernment now present in his camp because he took in the refuge and refuged one survivor. He has the Spirit of the Lord now with him in a different kind of way. And I sincerely believe that if you are one of those survivors, if you're one of those remnant, after all this shaking is done and through, when everything at the end of it is sifted and the sole survivors are left, they will be such a mighty blessing to those who take them in, to those who give them refuge, who comfort them, who cover them and shelter them. It is one of the most empowering and beneficial things you can do with your life is to take someone under your covering that has been a survivor, that has made it through, and then you can love them, you can serve them, you can feed them, you can clothe them, you can equip them and train them to send them forth to do mighty things, because that is where mighty men and women are made. Mighty men and women are made by being passed through the fires of suffering. And you know what? Some of us in our passing through, we will be slain. We will be taken captive. We will be killed. We will be persecuted. We will be in turmoil. We will be in anguish. We will be sawed in two. We will be hated by this world for his name's sake. But everyone's going to be hated. Don't you get it? Everyone is hated by this one. He hates them all. He's just an opportunistic hunter. You see? He's just looking for a foothold to devour the next one. He's on an ever-present devouring path where he will consume everything in a perfect... the Ouroborus, the serpent eating his own tail, it's a continual sense of destruction and devouring and consumption that he's plaguing the earth with. He will consume about everything he can get his hands on. Whether you choose to be a son of righteousness or a son of wickedness, you'll all be consumed the same. Do you understand? At the end of it, the corporate jobs, the corporate systems of the world that offered me was a dog-eat-dog, serpent-eating-its-tail system. That even if you climb to the top, you're chasing the applause of men at the end of the day. Some of you are appointed by the Father. Go and do that. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the system. Do you understand? I'm not talking about specific individuals. I'm talking about the system that you've been ensnared in. that system at the end of it will always produce another dog to eat the other dog's foot. But the Father is trying to create systems where we walk in his ways, where we follow this, where we actually create life and community out of this, not out of the systems that this serpent has made to ensnare us, to enslave us. That is why your Netflix binge is free. But it's going to be costly, inevitably, because time is the one thing you have in equal abundance as every other person alive at this moment, which is just another moment of it, is not guaranteed tomorrow. Do you ever really live your life like there is no tomorrow? When you're on the run and in the wilderness, you do. You do. This is why people that are discontented, in debt, and distressed, when they go into the wilderness, they treasure their life. They are so much more satisfied by a single meal because they actually know about the savory spice of hunger. Most of us don't know about how good a meal could taste if you were seriously hungry. Really hungry. Have you ever worked all day long, all as hard as you can on an empty stomach, and then you sit down to eat? How good is that meal? How wondrously delectable is that morsel of food you get? It is the most delicious meal because comfort may be scalable. Remember, things like the good blessings of a meal to satisfy a man, or a good drink of pure water, are some of the most satisfying things, and you find pleasure in it. Like more pleasure than you're willing to admit publicly pleasure when you eat a delicious meal and drink good water and have somewhere maybe to sit and take 1 day of rest. Just 1 day of rest can satisfy you like 6 weeks of PTO never did, because you were still thinking about going back to it, right? You still had to be a slave the rest of the time. It is brutal sometimes to be so ensnared in that for generations. And then you're just chasing the next day off. But the Father says to us, come to him, all who are weary and heavy laden, and he would give you rest. He'll give you rest no matter what situation you're in. If you are a part of that system, because you need to be a part of that system, you're strategically placed in it, and you can become a mighty person within. Go read my blog post called Becoming a Double Agent. I also read it to you. You can just listen to me say it to you if you want. Becoming a double agent. We all need to become double agents, right? We're going to become a double agent to him because we were all born to the camp of the dragon, right? But we're trying to become an agent for the Prince of Peace. And we're trying to be no longer the usurpers, be no longer the backbiters, be no longer the people that use blackmail, that go into the house of the Lord to learn a way to get advantage over their competitors, but to instead rely on prayer, intercession, walking in authority like never before, to be moved mightily, to become a mighty person so that wherever you go, the favor of the Lord is with you because you are a child of the King. You have his name, you have his authority. Whether you're going to the king's house, like Ehud, we read about Ehud, the left-handed assassin, he had the authority to go there. There's other times where, like Esther, she had the authority to go there. And she was risen up for such a time as this. You know how every time I end this video by saying you were born for such a time as this? That comes from the book of Esther, which is all about a mighty woman of God. Her father, a very wicked son of the serpent again, kind of lifestyle. There's these usurpings, these conspiracies where people are being influenced by the dragon to conspire on the earth to enact outrageous devouring consumption and destruction of the people of Yahweh. It's been going on forever, and it's going to continue, and it's just scalable, folks. It just manifests in greater and greater increments as the days draw nearer, as labor pains, the groaning and the tension of labor increases. It's inevitable, and there is a compression of time that you will feel as that gets closer and closer and closer, and the scales of magnitude get amplified. So be not ensnared by the entertainment the world is trying to offer you. If you have to stay in your house for months at a time, you could read and study now more than you've ever studied in your life because it's voluntary. It's voluntary. You get to choose the course load, some of you. Some of you have to comply to schooling systems that are difficult, and I begrudge often. That being said, you have a time to redeem. You have an opportunity to redeem your time while the days are not out without question, unstoppably evil. There's people in countries in Europe right now that can't drive outside their house without being stopped by police every 150 yards, every major intersection, and being asked where they're going and if they have permission to go there. Total, complete police states on an ongoing, perpetual basis for months. Like, if they said that in the United States, what do you think people would do? If they just said instead, hey, every 2 weeks, it's almost better. It's getting better. It's peaking. It's getting to a place where we can definitely open the doors again. Oh, no, not yet. Just a little bit longer. If we just kept kind of dragging people along that way, it's a very beneficial, more effective way to slowly draw people into that. There's other places where they're just like, no, 2 months, stay inside, you eat that. And people are like, yes, dainty morsel. Thank you. That's brutal. But when it's enforced that same way, it changes the way people act, right? If you have to stay inside, some of you, I hope you will take advantage of that like never before, because you know what? Sharpen your sword. Learn skills. Deepen your understanding. Grow in wisdom. Go learn things that you can learn right now. Go learn electrical wiring. Fix your house. Great. Home improvement, apartment improvement. Awesome. Learn a new trade. Learn 10 new trades. Learn as much as you possibly can right now while you still have an opportunity to learn in any capacity. Because if you don't have to just worry about food, water, shelter all the time, congratulations. You've upgraded yourself to very comfortable living compared to most. So take advantage of it, use it, and redeem it, because it is a time of deepening your character. You can deepen your character now and equip yourself with the ability to step forward more equipped for the days ahead. And I hope and pray each and every one of you will do that with earnest sincerity, because the days are intentionally, strategically designed to be evil. But so too is our deliverer, mighty to save. Do not forget him. Do not forget him, because he has also given you the days to learn and grow and become empowered to walk in authority and be mighty like never before. Because though that tragedy of what happened, of an entire class of people being wiped out, was on a scale that is atrocities. That is atrocious, genuinely atrocious. But without it, the provision of what needed to happen for the kingdom to be established could not have gone forth. And we must also trust that. If there's times in our life where we are going to witness that, or we are going to be ones who suffer that, or our families do, because the Father would so will it, let us then go boldly, shall we? Because here's the best word that I got in a long time. You ready for this? Hebrews 2. If you haven't read it, do requirement. Read it today. Gestate on it, chew on it, because you know what? It's delicious, and it'll feed your soul way more than another 30-minute Netflix binge. Yep, I'm back on that. All right. This is Hebrews 2, okay? Okay. Therefore, since the children share in the flesh and blood, Jesus himself likewise partook of the same, that through death he might render powerless him who had the power of death, that is, the dragon, and might free those who through fear of death were subject to slavery all their lives. And he might, let me say that again, and might free those who through fear of death were subject to slavery all their lives. For he assuredly does not give help to the angels, but he gives help to the descendants of Abraham. Therefore, he had to be made like his brethren in all things, so that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in things pertaining to Yahweh, to make propitiation for the sins of the people. For since he himself was tempted in that which he has suffered, he is able to come to the aid of those who are tempted. He's able to come to your aid if you are tempted. And most people, you know what they're tempted with most? This one, the fear of death. The power that the dragon used to have before the great high priest came and offered a sacrifice once and for all. Before that happened, the devil, the dragon, he really did have the power over death. Death is an entity. Death is not something that happens when you die. Death is a being, an individual entity, okay? There is authority that Jesus took back when he faced death. When death came for our master, when death came for him in the garden. Remember this? The serpent came there. You know what? The serpent brought with him death. Death came with him. Do you not see this? The serpent came there in that moment. The temptation of Christ, the temptation where he agonized, where he was strained to the point of, I believe he was bearing the temptations of men. And you know what the worst of them all was? That the master of our faith could not be tempted with until that moment. He couldn't be tempted with death. Because if you know that you are a mighty man, if you know you are a mighty woman, if you recognize the authority you have, you are immortal if you are walking in his ways. Until death has a powerful moment over you. Death is given an opportunity at times to contend with you, to contend with your family, to contend with your children. And if you do not rebuke death off of your family, I mean that, actually rebuke him. Go listen to Henry Groover sometime. If you want to hear about stories of miraculous healing, of people that die and they pray and rebuke death off of them, that man was in a car accident with his entire family. He had many children. His quiver was full, son. He could shoot a lot of arrows, which is an unbelievable man to have that many arrows. Terrifying enemy for the enemy. So the enemy tried to kill that man and murder him a lot. He was a evangelist. If you don't know what evangelists are, those are people who go about into all the corners of the earth, teaching the gospel, the good news to every creature. They do that with sincerity of devotion, as in full-time job, never-ending kind of commitments. Serious man of prayer and devotion to his master. He laid his life down. Death came for him lots. One of those times, I heard this at Hear the Watchman. Henry Groover shared this testimony at Hear the Watchman in Dallas in 2018. He talked about going through a rollover accident when he was driving with his family, all of them, in a car. And the roof caved in on his head and actually punctured through in his head. Just right down into the old brain pan. And he was dead, without question. Like, the outsides were on the insides, kind of topsy-turvy life that he had then. His daughter, his mom, everyone kind of gets out of the car. Basically, everyone else is unharmed. He's dead. His family gets out of the car. Obviously, there's some emotional, strong feelings happening in that time. But you know what one of his children did? Rebuked death off of her daddy. I pray to God. I pray to the living God. My daughter, by the end of all of this, at some point, she would rebuke death off of me. It should ever come for me before my time. That's a mighty daughter. She rebuked death off of her father, and it left him. And his brain healed in front of them. And he got up. And I met him, talked with him. This is a guy who's had a lot of those stories. He could talk for hours on end without stopping, for months and years, testimonies of these kinds of things. I'm not joking. There's people that have been living this way forever, since they got the call from their master. And they just went out into the camp of the world, wherever he called them, and they've been going through this forever. And you could have a mighty testimony like that too. And you should have one. You need those testimonies where death was rebuked off of you. But the only reason you can rebuke death off of someone who dies and it will flee is because you have a higher authority to appeal to. You have the one who conquered death in the garden. Jesus defeated death. It was the fear of death that he defeated right there in the garden with suffering, with anguish, with the weight of the world on his shoulders. He became the mightiest of men. He bore it for us so he could share in that. He knows what Ahimelech, he knows what it felt like for Abiathar to share in the suffering of everyone. He knows what that felt like because he felt that. Jesus was going to see destruction happen constantly. People he loves dies. He's seen and borne our afflictions. He's seen his children go through this time and again. And in the garden, when death came for him, he did not shirk. But you know what he did? He appealed to the higher authority. He appealed to his Father's will in heaven. So at the end of it, we all need to appeal that his will, not ours, be done on this earth as it is in heaven. That is what we pray for. That is what we contend with. Because when we do that, all authority that has been given in heaven and earth has been given to him, that he then gives to the Messiah, that the Messiah then gives back to the Father, and the Holy Spirit pours out again on us so that we can be his body bearing that authority on this earth. And we have the power sincerely to raise the dead, to rebuke death off of people, and to bring them back to life. But the best thing to rebuke off of somebody else is not the death in their bones, but the fear of death that has enslaved them to sit inside a system that is causing them destruction and decay. People need freedom from that more than they need freedom from anything bodily in this world. They need freedom of the fear of death. That is why there are survivors. That's why there's one left over. Because you know what? Death had authority over the priests that day, but not all of them. That one man, that one survivor, bore the testimonies of the scriptures. Go read Psalm 119, all of it. Go read all of it. And you know how many times he talks about the testimonies? Almost 24 times that he talks about. He loves the testimonies, the power of the testimonies. The testimonies are a weapon beyond measure. But the enemy is defeated by the blood of the Lamb. That blood started being spilled in the garden, not on the cross alone, not on the crucifixion stake alone. It was spilt in the garden. That is where he stained the earth. He first bled for us in his garden. He will send many of us back to the garden, back to Eden. Go garden, learn how to garden, cultivate the soil, learn while the sweat of your brow will heal you. You need to sweat it out. The sweat of your brow will heal you. So many of you. He sweated out there, the blood of the Lamb there, but then he said the words of our testimonies. That's our spoken word. That's our lived out word of the testimonies. Go earn your testimony. Go live it now. Don't wait. Don't wait to be the hero out in the forest calling to people, be a mighty man now. Go be the mighty man. Go serve all of the mighty people around you. Serve them now. Go wash your friends' feet. Go wash your parents' feet. Repent to them. Anguish for them. Pray for them. Deliver them. Be a servant above all others. And you know what? In doing so, you will be the mightiest among all of them. You will. You will be without question the most powerful person in the room. And should ever he call on you, you will be ready. And he will say, where are you? And you will say, here I am, O Master. Call on me. So we do. It is the blood of the Lamb, the word of our testimonies, and not loving our life even when faced with death. That is what he offers us. That is what the King of Kings offers us. So that should you be the survivors, should you be the ones left over, you go bear forth his testimony, and then you be a weapon of more ferocious commitment than ever before in the history of your life. You go be a mighty warrior and bear those testimonies. And with great love and with great service, you would annihilate the kingdom of cowardice within and without. Because the kingdom of heaven suffers violence, and the violent take it by force. So go wage those spiritual wars. Go fight those physical battles that would destroy the works of your flesh and advance the kingdom of joy and hope and life to all those you've been entrusted with. Remember, you were born for such a time as this, so be faithful even unto the death. I love you. Be diligent, be on guard, be sober. For your enemy, the dragon, prowls about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. So therefore, submit yourselves to God. Submit yourselves to Yahweh, and he will deliver you. I love you. Be strong and courageous.